Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a time before kings and crowns. Before coins. Before writing. Before anyone could even imagine a word like civilization. Find a quiet spot. Maybe dim the lights. Let your mind slow down, just enough to listen but not quite enough to stay fully awake. Because tonight, we're tracing the strange, soft history of mushrooms. And before you fall asleep, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, or, do that sleepy little tap on the bell icon. You won't remember in the morning anyway, but it'll help me sleep better knowing you did. Alright, let's drift. Mushrooms are older than trees. That's not poetic exaggeration, it's just inconveniently true. The first fungi appeared hundreds of millions of years before the first tree ever pushed a root into soil. While plants were still figuring out how to stand upright, fungi had already built their own vast underground networks. Invisible cities of thread-like roots, mycelium, stretching quietly through the Earth's crust. And when humans finally showed up, blinking and barefoot, those mushrooms were waiting. It didn't take long for early people to notice that some mushrooms made food taste better. Some made colors richer. Some made you see the gods. And some made you die. A tricky set of options, really. Let's start somewhere near the end of the last ice age. Around 12,000 years ago, humans in Europe were beginning to settle into semi-permanent camps. They followed herds, gathered berries, and, according to a few suspiciously psychedelic cave paintings, experimented with what the forest offered. In Spain's Selva Pascuala cave, there's a mural of a row of mushrooms with long, thin stems and rounded tops. They look suspiciously like Psilocybe hispanica, a hallucinogenic species still found in that region. Which means, yes, humanity's first known art gallery might also have been the first bad trip. Of course, the word trip didn't exist then. But something did. A sense of the forest being alive, whispering, breathing. Early hunter-gatherers didn't separate nature from spirit. So when mushrooms made the world shimmer and shift, that wasn't hallucination. That was revelation. They weren't experimenting for fun. They were communing with what they thought was the living mind of the world. And really, if you've spent your life walking under endless stars in silence, maybe you'd believe that too. But let's move gently ahead, to the Neolithic. Farming. Pottery. Grain storage. And still, mushrooms. The fungus had become something between food and mystery. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, they appear in early mythology like strange, recurring guests. In Siberia, for instance, the Amanita muscaria, the red-capped, white-spotted mushroom, became a sacred tool of the shamans. You've seen it before, the cartoon toadstool from fairy tales. Except in this case, it wasn't whimsical at all. Siberian shamans would eat these mushrooms to enter trance states. They'd see visions, speak to spirits, and, sometimes, sing the messages they received. The problem? Amanita muscaria is mildly toxic. So, they found a solution that only ancient humans could have invented. They drank each other's urine. Yes. Because the psychoactive compounds survived digestion, but the toxins didn't. So the second-hand urine was safer, and still magical. It's a strange moment in human ingenuity, the birth of both recycling and religion. Meanwhile, further south, the ancient peoples of Mesoamerica were cultivating their own relationship with mushrooms. The Aztecs called them Tiananacatl, literally, the flesh of the gods. They were used in religious ceremonies long before European contact. Priests would consume them to speak with divine beings. Their visions became prophecy, law, and sometimes, public spectacle. To the Aztecs, these weren't drugs. They were sacred keys, opening doors between worlds. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s, they were horrified. Because, of course they were. Europe at the time barely tolerated joy, let alone spiritual hallucination. Missionaries wrote about the diabolical mushrooms that made the natives see devils. The rituals were banned. The mushrooms went underground. But the knowledge lingered. Hidden in songs, in secret ceremonies, in whispers that outlived empires. And speaking of Europe, let's drift back across the sea, to a culture that loved mushrooms, but only on their dinner tables. The Romans adored fungi. They treated mushrooms like the ancient equivalent of truffles, rare, expensive, and often fatal. Because naturally, they made it worse. Roman aristocrats were obsessed with rare mushroom feasts. They didn't yet know which ones were poisonous, but that never stopped them. Pliny the Elder, the original grumpy historian, warned repeatedly that mushrooms killed more emperors than assassins ever did. He wasn't wrong. Claudius, the Roman emperor famous for stuttering, limping, and somehow surviving multiple family coups, met his end thanks to a plate of mushrooms. His wife, Agrippina the Younger, served them to him personally. They were laced with poison. He died quietly in bed, confused and vomiting. The Romans called mushrooms the food of the gods. After Claudius's death, someone joked that he'd finally become one. Dark humor has been part of mushroom culture ever since. Meanwhile, in China, mushrooms were taking a more respectable route. There, they were medicine, symbols of immortality, serenity, and long life. Ancient Taoist texts mention the lingzhi or reishi mushroom, said to grant eternal youth. Emperors sent expeditions to find it, often in vain. The idea was that by consuming such a fungus, one could harmonize with the life force of the universe. It was calm, poetic, and entirely lacking in urine-drinking rituals. A refreshing contrast to Siberia. But the Chinese weren't the only ones to notice mushrooms could heal or harm. Medieval physicians in Europe prescribed certain mushrooms to treat wounds or induce vomiting. Which is really just a fancy way of saying they weren't sure what they were doing, but they were confident about it anyway. By the Middle Ages, fungi had acquired an awkward reputation. Neither plant nor animal, growing in decay, often overnight, it was suspicious. People saw them as symbols of rot, witchcraft, or worse, paganism. To the church, that was 3 strikes. Still, peasants quietly gathered them for food. Some ended up in stews. Others, in potions. And every now and then, someone found a mushroom that didn't behave. Ergot, for instance, a fungus that grows on rye. When consumed accidentally in bread, it caused muscle spasms, hallucinations, and burning sensations in the limbs. It was called St. Anthony's fire. Whole towns were stricken. People writhed in the streets, seeing demons and lights that weren't there. Naturally, the church blamed witches. Because, of course they did. In hindsight, it might have been the bread. Still, mushrooms refused to stay in the shadows. They crept back into culture, myth, and even art. Renaissance paintings quietly included fungi in still lives and forest scenes. Nobody mentioned them outright, but they were there, tiny reminders that nature held secrets humans still didn't understand. Then came the Enlightenment. Scientists began to name and classify everything. And fungi became a headache. Were they plants? Were they animals? They had spores, not seeds. They ate by dissolving things. Basically, nature's introverts, thriving quietly on decomposition. In 1753, Carl Linnaeus reluctantly put mushrooms in the plant kingdom. He didn't like it. But he didn't have a better idea. It would take nearly 2 centuries before biologists accepted that fungi were their own kingdom entirely. Independent. Neither green nor living in sunlight. Just quietly thriving in the dark. Let's drift to the 20th century now. A world of microscopes, chemistry, and returning curiosity about consciousness. In 1955, a woman named R. Gordon Wasson, an American banker turned amateur mycologist, attended a secret mushroom ceremony in Mexico. His hosts were the Mazatec people. Their priestess, Maria Sabina, guided participants through a spiritual journey using psilocybe mushrooms. Wasson returned home and wrote an article for Life magazine titled "Seeking the Magic Mushroom." It caused a cultural eruption. Western scientists, poets, and eventually rock musicians decided mushrooms were the key to expanding the mind. By the 1960s, psilocybin became the psychedelic of choice for the young and restless. And then, naturally, governments banned it. The pattern repeated. Discovery, reverence, fear, suppression. Like a mushroom cycle, appearing, disappearing, then quietly returning underground. Even today, mushrooms keep surprising us. We've found fungi that can digest oil spills, plastics, even radiation. We've found networks of mycelium that allow trees to communicate. Forests sharing nutrients, sending distress signals, redistributing carbon, all through fungal threads. Some scientists call it the Wood Wide Web. It sounds whimsical. It's not. It's real biology, and it's older than civilization. So, when people say humanity discovered mushrooms, it's more accurate to say mushrooms discovered us. They've been shaping the planet for billions of years. We're just the latest creatures to trip over them, sometimes literally. And if you're still awake, congratulations. You've made it through tens of thousands of years of human fungal fascination without losing your sense of balance. But this is only the beginning. Because the story of mushrooms isn't just about what we ate or hallucinated. It's about how something so small, so silent, ended up entangled with our myths, our medicine, our madness, and even our morality. So, let's drift deeper into the spore cloud next time, where mushrooms shaped not just rituals, but whole societies. For now, close your eyes. Imagine the quiet hum of the earth beneath you, threads of life passing unseen, feeding forests, recycling everything that ever was. Because in the end, fungi are the caretakers of decay. And in their strange, patient way, they make sure nothing ever really ends. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Let's keep floating. Last time, we wandered through the deep past, when mushrooms were gods, poisons, and dinner, sometimes all at once. Now we're moving through the age when humanity thought it finally understood things. Which, of course, meant it was about to make everything worse. So, tuck in. Let the room dim a little more. Maybe there's a faint hum from somewhere, the kind that makes your eyelids heavy. Perfect. Let's drift back into history's soft rot. By the time the Renaissance had finished painting cherubs on ceilings and inventing guilt about pleasure, Europe had developed what we could politely call a complex about fungi. They were peasants' food, growing from filth. They were associated with witches, damp cellars, and anything the church preferred not to discuss. Still, people kept eating them. Because hunger doesn't care about superstition. And mushrooms, when they're not deadly, are delicious. In 17th century France, something quietly changed. Gardeners at Versailles began cultivating Agaricus bisporus, what we now call the button mushroom, inside abandoned quarries beneath Paris. It was the perfect environment, dark, humid, and far from the sunlit nonsense of nobility. The aristocracy loved the novelty. Finally, mushrooms could be consumed without the risk of being accused of devil worship. By the 1700s, Parisian mushroom farms were thriving underground. A whole subterranean economy was blooming while powdered wigs danced above ground. It was almost poetic. Human vanity on the surface, fungal patience below. But while Europe tamed its appetites, Asia was perfecting its mycology. In Japan and China, mushrooms were already medicines, delicacies, and philosophical metaphors. The shiitake, the enoki, the maitake, each with its own meaning. To the Chinese, mushrooms represented longevity and renewal. They grew from decay but offered life. Doctors prescribed them for balance, what they called qi. The lingzhi or reishi mushroom became known as the mushroom of immortality. Paintings and porcelain alike showed it curling like a red cloud, floating in the hands of sages. It's hard not to admire the calm dignity of it all. Meanwhile, in Europe, people were still dying from confusing Amanita phalloides, the death cap, with edible puffballs. So yes, some continents were aging gracefully. Others, not so much. Medicine and mushrooms eventually collided properly in the 19th century. By then, scientists had microscopes, chemistry sets, and, most importantly, curiosity. They discovered that fungi weren't just food. They were chemical factories. Inside their filaments were substances capable of killing bacteria, numbing pain, or destroying organs, depending on your luck. Of course, luck isn't a very scientific term. So they called it research. In 1928, Alexander Fleming accidentally left a petri dish of Staphylococcus bacteria uncovered. A mold spore drifted in, landed, and began secreting something that dissolved the bacteria. That mold was Penicillium notatum. Fleming had just discovered penicillin, the first true antibiotic. Humanity had spent millennia fearing fungi. And it turned out fungi had been quietly holding the cure to our infections the entire time. Naturally, nobody believed him for 10 years. It's an oddly human pattern, ignoring salvation because it's fuzzy and smells weird. Still, once penicillin took off, it changed everything. Infections that used to kill without hesitation, pneumonia, gangrene, even syphilis, suddenly had an enemy. Hospitals went from being quiet waiting rooms for death to noisy, bustling places of survival. And all thanks to fungus. We didn't exactly thank it, though. We just industrialized it, patented it, and moved on. But not all fungal relationships were so charitable. Some of them were intimate and deeply unpleasant. Let's talk about Candida albicans. You've probably met it, though hopefully not personally. It's a yeast that lives quietly inside humans, behaving itself most of the time. But give it an opportunity, weak immunity, antibiotics, stress, and it blooms. Mouth, skin, other less polite places. A reminder that fungi aren't out there. They're us. Humans are walking ecosystems. And fungi are tenants who never pay rent but somehow keep the lights on. Meanwhile, mycologists, those gentle souls who study fungi, were learning that mushrooms are only the visible part of the story. The fruiting body. The tip of an enormous, hidden network of threads underground. One organism could stretch for miles. In Oregon, scientists found a single Armillaria ostoi, a honey fungus, covering nearly 4 square miles. It's considered the largest living organism on Earth. Thousands of years old. Growing silently beneath the forest, feeding on roots, recycling the dead, supporting the living. It's hard not to feel small after that. Tiny mammals scurrying over a sleeping god made of wood and decay. Now, let's take a softer turn, to the early 20th century again, where fungi weren't curing infections but curing curiosity. In the 1950s, psychiatrists began using psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, in therapy. They found it could dissolve ego boundaries, ease depression, and help terminal patients find peace. It wasn't about getting high. It was about quiet clarity. For a brief moment, mushrooms were both medicine and mystery again. Then came the 1960s. And Timothy Leary. The man turned self-discovery into a carnival. What began in therapy rooms ended up in music festivals and college lawns. mushrooms became symbols of rebellion, freedom, and, inevitably, fear. By the 1970s, nearly every government in the Western world had declared them illegal. Which, historically speaking, is exactly what happens whenever humans start enjoying something too much. And yet, fungi never seem to hold grudges. They just keep doing their work. Breaking down what dies. Feeding what grows. Waiting for us to notice again. Even today, scientists are exploring mushrooms for new medicines. Some compounds show promise against cancer. Others for anxiety, PTSD, or addiction. It's ironic, after centuries of suspicion, we're back where our ancestors started, using mushrooms to heal the mind. Except now, there's peer review. But for every miracle mushroom, there's a menace. Take Aspergillus flavus, the fungus that produces aflatoxin, one of the most potent carcinogens known. It hides in stored grains, nuts, and spices. You can't see it or smell it. You just slowly get sick. It's not dramatic. Just quietly devastating, like most things fungi do. Or consider Cryptococcus gattii, a fungal pathogen that infects the lungs and brain. It thrives in the soil beneath eucalyptus trees. Recently, it started appearing in places it never used to live, likely thanks to climate change. Fungi adapt fast. Faster than we'd prefer. They don't need passports or borders. They just need warmth and time. Still, there's something comforting about their persistence. When life on Earth was nearly wiped out by ice, fungi survived. When humans sterilized hospitals, they crept back through air vents. When we burn forests, they regrow from the ash. Fungi are the patient undertakers of existence. They never hurry. They never panic. They just continue. And that brings us to a quiet irony. For most of history, humans tried to dominate nature. We invented gods, machines, empires, always above ground, always reaching upward. Meanwhile, the fungi below simply kept weaving everything together. The forest isn't a collection of trees. It's a fungal community wearing green hats. Every leaf that falls, every log that decays, it all ends up in their care. Nothing wasted. Nothing lost. It's a kind of silent mercy that doesn't need worship or recognition. So the next time you see a mushroom pushing up through soil or sprouting from an old stump, remember, it's not alone. It's the surface punctuation of a vast, ancient sentence written beneath your feet. And that sentence says, everything ends. And everything begins again. Still awake? Good. Because we're not done yet. In our next part, we'll drift through how mushrooms invaded the human imagination, turning into fairy rings, witch circles, and symbols of death, rebirth, and forbidden knowledge. The fungi beneath folklore. The spores beneath stories. But for now, let your breath slow. Let the world soften. And if you happen to dream tonight, maybe you'll find yourself walking through a quiet forest, the air thick and damp, and the ground alive beneath your steps. Because the mushrooms are still there. Always were. Always will be. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. The night's still long, and history, especially fungal history, moves slowly. Last time, we drifted through the medicinal age of mushrooms, from divine hallucinations to antibiotics, and all the human confusion in between. Now, we're slipping into softer ground. The realm of myth. Of folklore, whispers, and the stories told beside dim fires when the forest outside felt a little too alive. So, close your eyes, if they're not already halfway there, and imagine mist curling around your ankles. The smell of wet leaves. The quiet rhythm of rain on moss. And in the middle of it all, a small circle of mushrooms. Perfectly round. Perfectly wrong. Let's drift there now. The fairy ring might be one of the most recognizable symbols in old European folklore. A neat circle of mushrooms appearing overnight, as if by invisible hands. To medieval minds, that could only mean one thing: someone, or something, had been dancing. Fairies, elves, witches, spirits, all were blamed, or credited, depending on how poetic you felt. The circles were said to be the footprints of the fairy court, dancing through the night to pipes and fiddles no human could hear. To step inside one was to risk everything: your time, your sanity, even your soul. Some said you'd be trapped there for years, only to stumble home thinking a single night had passed. Others believed you'd dance yourself to death. There was never a version where it ended well. In parts of Germany, people called them Hexenringe, witch rings. They said witches gathered there to call up spirits before flying off to their sabbats. In the Netherlands, it was said the devil himself sat in the middle, smoking a pipe, the smoke burning the ground into that perfect circle. And in Britain, they were simply known as fairy circles, gateways to the otherworld. Even the 17th century English naturalist Thomas Browne tried to explain them rationally. He wrote that perhaps the rings were caused by thunderbolts striking the earth. Because, of course, fungi were clearly weapons from heaven. Humanity hadn't yet discovered spores, but it had no shortage of imagination. If you're wondering what really causes them, it's quite simple. A single fungal organism grows outward in all directions beneath the soil, sending up mushrooms at the edge of its expanding circle. As the center runs out of nutrients, the fungus stops fruiting there, leaving that ring behind. Perfectly natural. Perfectly ordinary. Which, of course, makes the myth even more beautiful. Because humans saw geometry in the dirt and thought, magic. Fairy rings weren't the only fungi to crawl into folklore. In Scandinavia, mushrooms were linked with lightning. People believed they grew where Thor's hammer struck the ground. In Slavic countries, red-capped Amanita muscaria mushrooms were tied to Purin, another thunder god. Apparently, if something came from the sky and killed you, it was divine. The same mushroom, the famous red one with white spots, also appears in Siberian shamanism and across northern Eurasia. It's easy to see why it fascinated people. It glows red through snow, almost like a wound in the forest. It looks edible, almost friendly, and then, it isn't. But the hallucinogenic effects of Amanita muscaria may have fed more than one myth. Some historians even suspect it inspired the story of Santa Claus. Think about it. A red and white figure descending from the sky, delivering joy, associated with pine trees and reindeer, animals that, incidentally, love eating those same mushrooms. Shamans in Siberia would collect Amanita muscaria during winter, dry them in socks hung by the fire, and distribute them during solstice ceremonies. They even entered yurts through the smoke hole in the roof when snow blocked the doorway. It sounds ridiculous, but so does most of human history when you tell it slowly enough. Further south, in Celtic folklore, mushrooms marked thin places, spots where the veil between worlds was fragile. Fairy rings could appear on moors, in forests, or near stones said to walk on midsummer nights. People left offerings, milk, bread, honey, to appease whatever danced there after dark. It wasn't worship. It was insurance. Better to respect the unseen than test your luck. The same idea lingered in Wales, where farmers told children never to disturb mushrooms growing in circles. Let them dance, they'd say. You don't want them to dance with you. But superstition wasn't confined to Europe. Across Africa, some tribes believed mushrooms carried the souls of the dead. In parts of the Congo Basin, they were seen as spiritual messengers, the earth's breath made visible. Certain species were never eaten, only spoken to softly, as if listening for answers. Among the Maya of Central America, mushroom stones, small carved figures with mushroom-shaped heads, have been found in tombs. Archaeologists still debate their purpose. Were they idols? Grave guardians? A quiet acknowledgement of the flesh of the gods? Whatever they were, they tell us one thing. Mushrooms had meaning long before they had names. Then came Christianity, and with it, suspicion. Anything that grew suddenly, without seed or root, had to be unnatural. Mushrooms became symbols of temptation and decay. In medieval manuscripts, they sometimes appeared in the background of Eden scenes, near the tree of knowledge, small reminders that curiosity has consequences. Some theologians even proposed that mushrooms were created by the devil, because apparently, fungus was his chosen medium. And in a strange way, they weren't entirely wrong. Fungi do appear from rot. They thrive in darkness. They feed on death. But then again, so does life. By the Victorian era, Europe's relationship with mushrooms softened again. Fairy lore became decorative instead of dangerous. Illustrators painted children dancing in mushroom rings, smiling at delicate, winged creatures. The terror faded, the whimsy remained. It's as if, somewhere along the way, people forgot that these circles once marked forbidden places. That they were, in older minds, warnings, not invitations. But that's the way of folklore, it composts over time. Old fears break down into harmless stories. And new generations grow up thinking the forest was always friendly. Meanwhile, in the Real Forest, fungi continued doing their quiet work. Their spores drifting through the air, landing, growing, dying, repeating. While humans invented myths about them, mushrooms stayed exactly what they always were, patient recyclers, erasing the line between life and death. That's probably why they appear so often in funerary art and myth. From ancient Egypt to Japan, mushrooms were tied to the afterlife. Not as symbols of doom, but as guides. Transformers of the body into the earth again. They were the messengers of decay. And in their way, the keepers of eternity. Even today, you can feel that old reverence when you walk in a damp forest. The quiet hum of life turning itself over. A fallen log, half gone, half new. The smell, rich, earthy, slightly sweet. That's decomposition. But it's also rebirth. Every breath you take contains spores. Invisible, countless, waiting. They've been there since before words. And they'll be there long after we've forgotten how to speak them. So when you see a fairy ring, maybe don't step inside. Not because of curses or fairy queens or time slipping away, but because it's a reminder that there's a world beneath ours, one that never needed us to believe in it. It just needed us to return to it. Eventually. Still awake? Let's keep drifting. Next time, we'll wander through the modern age of mushrooms, how science began to rediscover the spiritual, how fungi became a symbol for connection, ecology, and even artificial intelligence. From sacred spores to space research. Because, yes, mushrooms might outlive us in space, too. But for now, let your thoughts slow, like spores settling in the dark. And remember, everything you are will someday feed the forest. And that's not tragedy. That's balance. Sleep well in that thought. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Let's keep drifting, quietly now, into the underworld. We've wandered through ancient rituals, divine hallucinations, and fairy rings. But tonight, we're going deeper. Not into myth this time. Into something far older, far larger, and infinitely more real. Because the true kingdom of mushrooms isn't in storybooks. It's beneath your feet. And whether you like it or not, you're part of it. So take a breath. Let it slow. And imagine the ground below you alive, breathing, connected. Let's drift down there now. Once, scientists thought trees were the masters of the forest. They reached for the sun, grew tall and noble, exchanged gases with the air. They seemed like individuals, independent, self-sufficient, serene. But it turns out they've been whispering this whole time. Through mushrooms. The roots of trees are laced with fungal filaments, microscopic threads called hyphae. They branch and weave, forming a web known as mycelium. Together, these networks stretch for miles. They allow trees to share water, sugar, and even warnings. A tree under attack by insects can send distress signals through the fungal network, prompting nearby trees to boost their chemical defenses. A shaded sapling can receive nutrients from older trees through the same web. It's not a metaphor. It's communication. And the messenger is fungus. Scientists call it the mycorrhizal network. But most people just call it the Wood Wide Web. Which is cute, but a little too tidy. Because this isn't the internet. It's something older, slower, wiser. No cables, no code. Just chemistry and patience. The mycelium doesn't control the forest, it connects it. It turns competition into cooperation. Or, at least, negotiation. If trees are the visible world, fungi are the diplomats of the invisible one. You might think of a forest as a collection of individuals. It isn't. It's a single, tangled conversation made of roots, soil, and spores. Every plant that grows above ground owes its life to fungi below. Millions of years ago, the first plants could only survive on land because fungi shared nutrients with them. In return, the plants shared sugars. A deal struck in the mud. And they've been partners ever since. Without fungi, forests would collapse in a season. Nutrients wouldn't cycle. Dead things would simply stay dead. Which sounds tidy, but isn't great for the living. And here's the part that feels almost mystical, though it's just biology. Mycelium networks don't have a central brain. No command center. No hierarchy. Yet they can make decisions. They route nutrients where needed, avoid toxins, and even learn from experience. When scientists exposed a fungal colony to salt, it initially recoiled. But after repeated exposure, it adapted, finding new routes around the irritation. Later, when the same fungus encountered salt again, it remembered and avoided it immediately. That's right. A brainless organism remembered. Humans take pride in memory. Fungi do it without neurons. If that doesn't humble you, it should. Because while we build machines to mimic intelligence, the soil already runs one ancient, decentralized, self-healing. And it doesn't crash when someone forgets a password. The largest known organism on Earth isn't a whale or a tree. It's a fungus. Armillaria ostoi, the honey mushroom, sprawling under Oregon's Blue Mountains. It weighs hundreds of tons and covers several square miles. Thousands of years old. Still alive. Still growing. If that doesn't sound like a mind, it's at least a memory. A record written in wood and rot. And perhaps that's the secret. Fungi don't dominate, they participate. They don't shout. They whisper. And everything listens. There's a strange comfort in that. That the world isn't just competition and chaos. That beneath all our noise, there's an older kind of order, gentle, patient, deliberate. But of course, humans can't leave anything alone. Once we discovered mycelium networks, we decided to monetize them. Researchers found that the same properties that make fungi such good communicators could be useful for us. Fungal materials are strong, lightweight, and biodegradable. Companies are now growing mycelium to make packaging, leather alternatives, even building materials. Imagine an entire house grown from fungus. Fire-resistant, compostable, eerily sustainable. It sounds futuristic, but it's really prehistoric logic, letting decay build life again. And somewhere in the dark, the fungi must be amused. After all, they've been recycling for billions of years. We're just late to the party. The military, naturally, got interested too. Because if something connects and grows, someone wants to weaponize it. Scientists have explored fungal structures for self-repairing materials, biosensors, even potential data storage. There's talk of fungal computing. Let that sink in. Nature has already invented a biological version of the internet, and humans are only now catching on. Imagine logging onto a network that grows, heals, and decomposes when you're done. It's the most organic kind of intelligence imaginable, quiet, humble, and unstoppable. But not all fungal intelligence is benevolent. Some species manipulate insects with almost cinematic flair. The Ophiocordyceps fungus, for instance, infects ants. It invades their brains, takes control of their movements, and forces them to climb high before killing them. The fungus then bursts from their skulls to release spores. It's gruesome. It's horrifying. And it's brilliantly efficient. Nature doesn't do morality. Just mycelium. Humans, being creative, immediately turn this real-life nightmare into art. Zombie fiction, video games, apocalyptic scenarios. The Last of Us borrowed its concept directly from cordyceps. Because nothing says romantic human frailty like a fungus wearing their body as a hat. And yet, even that story is a kind of tribute. A recognition that the smallest, softest forms of life are the most enduring. If humanity vanished tomorrow, the fungi would sigh, digest us, and move on. Probably greener for it. But let's not get too bleak. Because there's another way to look at all this. Fungi don't just decompose. They compose. They take fragments, fallen leaves, dead trees, forgotten bones, and knit them back into the fabric of the world. Every molecule recycled. Every ending turned into a beginning. If there's a religion in that, it's one of humility. Of acceptance. Of patience with impermanence. Maybe that's why people who study fungi often sound oddly serene. You spend enough time with decay, and you stop fearing it. Even modern thinkers are turning to mycelium as a metaphor for society, decentralized systems, community resilience, the hidden structures that hold everything together. It's almost funny. For centuries, humans worshipped the sky, sun gods, thunder gods, divine light. And now, we're realizing salvation was always underfoot. The divine network of rot. So, when you walk through a forest, remember, every step presses against billions of threads. You're treading across minds and messages you can't see. And they're not just beneath you, they're within you. Fungal spores drift through your lungs, your gut, even your skin. You are, biologically speaking, part mushroom already. There's something soothing in that thought. You're never alone. You're just one more temporary guest in the great mycelial conversation. Still awake? Good. Then let's keep drifting just a little farther, beyond the forest, beyond Earth itself. Because next time, we'll follow mushrooms into space. Yes, space. The one place we thought they'd never belong. And yet, they do. In Part 5, Spores in the Void, How Mushrooms Might Outlive Humanity, we'll watch as fungi hitch rides on meteorites, survive radiation, and quietly suggest that life itself may have started, not in sunlight, but in the dark. For now, close your eyes. Imagine the quiet pulse beneath the soil, patient and eternal. And if you listen closely, you might almost hear it. The soft hum of the earth dreaming in fungal threads. Sleep well, little spore. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Let's keep floating. Tonight, we're drifting even farther, beyond the forests, beyond the soil, into the quiet black between stars. We've followed mushrooms through prehistory, through gods and hallucinations, through fairy circles and forests. Now, it's time to follow them into space. Because fungi, it seems, don't particularly care where they live. And they might just be the ultimate survivors of the universe. So settle in. Let your breath slow. And imagine yourself weightless. The hum of the ship fades, the stars stretch forever, and in the silence, a single spore drifts by. Let's begin there. When scientists started sending life into orbit, they wanted to know what could survive the void. The results were predictable. Most things died. Radiation, vacuum, cosmic cold, space isn't known for hospitality. But then they tried fungi. And, of course, fungi said, sure. Why not? Spores survived open exposure on the outside of the International Space Station for years. No air. No warmth. No sunlight. Just endless cosmic radiation, and yet, they endured. When retrieved, some even began growing again. It wasn't just survival. It was defiance. The reason lies in their design. A fungal spore is a masterpiece of minimalist engineering, microscopic, sealed, and self-contained. Its walls are layered with protective compounds that can resist desiccation, cold, and radiation. Essentially, nature built a spaceship. Billions of years before we did. And these spores can remain dormant for astonishing lengths of time. Centuries, even millennia, waiting patiently for the right conditions. They don't die. They just pause. So when we imagine life traveling between planets, or even between stars, fungi make a surprisingly logical candidate. There's a theory for that, panspermia. It suggests that life might spread across the universe through spores or microbes hitching rides on meteorites or dust. When a planet is struck, debris can be flung into space, carrying bits of life with it. Most would perish. But some, perhaps fungal spores, might endure the journey. Imagine it. A rock drifting through the cosmos, carrying sleeping fungi across light years. Eons pass. Stars are born and die. And eventually, the rock crashes into another world. A little warmth, a little moisture. And the spores awaken. It's not impossible. Just patient. In 2019, a fungal species called Cryptococcus neoformans was tested under simulated Martian conditions. Thin air. Extreme cold. Ultraviolet light that would sterilize most microbes in seconds. And yet, the fungus shrugged. Some researchers believe that if life ever existed on Mars, or even now survives in its hidden caves, fungi might be part of it. Not the elegant, mushroom-capped forms we imagine, but shadowy mats of hyphae sleeping beneath the dust, waiting for the faintest trace of water to wake them. And if they are there, it raises a beautiful question. Did they start on Mars? Or did they arrive from somewhere else? Because fungi aren't limited by our idea of life. They don't need sunlight. They don't photosynthesize. They live off what others leave behind: minerals, radiation, decay. Some species even feed on radiation itself. That's right, radioactive fungi, thriving inside the ruins of Chernobyl. They metabolize the energy of decay. While humans fled, they colonized. It's almost poetic. The planet poisons itself, and fungi quietly turn poison into dinner. This led NASA to start asking a strange question. If fungi can survive radiation, could they protect us from it? The answer seems to be yes. Fungal species like Cladosporium sphaerospermum can absorb radiation through a pigment called melanin. When scientists grew this fungus aboard the International Space Station, they found it reduced radiation levels beneath it by several %. A thin layer, barely a few millimeters thick, offered measurable shielding. It's the kind of discovery that makes science fiction feel redundant. Because imagine this. A base on Mars, its walls lined not with steel, but with living mycelium. Self-healing. Regenerating. Feeding on waste and protecting its human guests. The first homes on another planet might not be built. They might be grown. And yet, as usual, fungi had the idea first. They've been colonizing alien environments since Earth's beginning. When the planet was a volcanic wasteland, fungi were among the first to crawl out of the oceans, forming early symbioses with plants. They didn't need rich soil, just rock, air, and time. They secrete acids to break down minerals, slowly converting stone into fertile ground. Without fungi, continents would have remained barren. So, if we ever hope to terraform Mars, or any other world, we'll probably send fungi first. They'll do the groundwork, quite literally. Turning dust to soil, rock to root. Some NASA biologists have begun experimenting with mycotecture, structures made entirely from fungal material. The concept is elegantly simple. You grow architecture. Mycelium is poured into a mold, fed on agricultural waste, and left to expand. Once dried, it becomes as tough as concrete, yet lighter and fully biodegradable. A dome made from fungal matter could grow itself in days, without heavy machinery or human labor. And if damaged, just mist it with water, it'll repair itself. It sounds whimsical, but prototypes already exist. The future of space construction may look less like engineering, and more like gardening. Even in fiction, mushrooms have often been treated as alien. Their shapes are strange, their reproduction invisible, their behavior almost sentient. They don't fit cleanly into our categories of life. Not plant. Not animal. Something in between. Something other. And maybe that's the point. Perhaps life elsewhere in the universe doesn't look like us. Perhaps it looks like them. Soft, adaptable, patient. Eternal recyclers drifting between stars. There's a quiet irony to it all. Humanity dreams of conquering the cosmos, of leaving our small planet behind, of becoming immortal among the stars. But fungi already are. They've done it quietly, without rockets, without fanfare. They persist in our spacecraft, our labs, our own bodies. They thrive on metal, plastic, and even fuel residues. Wherever we go, they follow. And perhaps that's their plan all along. We'll bring them to Mars, to Europa, to the moons of Saturn. And when we're gone, when our domes collapse and our bones turn to dust, they'll remain. Eating, growing, remembering. We are, in the end, just another temporary vehicle. Spores with passports. But maybe that isn't so grim. Maybe it's the closest thing to immortality life can have. We don't endure as individuals, we endure through participation. Through what we feed, and what feeds on us. Mushrooms remind us that permanence isn't the point. Continuity is. Decay is not an end, it's a conversation. And in that conversation, everything finds its turn to speak. Picture it now. A dead world, long after humanity's silence. The stars have dimmed. The last satellites have fallen. And on a lonely plain of dust, something stirs, a faint, white thread creeping from a buried stone. It grows, splitting, branching, exploring. There's no sunlight here. No life. And yet, it continues, drawing the last traces of energy from the minerals around it. Not out of purpose. Just out of habit. Because life, once begun, rarely knows how to stop. That's the secret, isn't it? Fungi aren't symbols of death. They're proof that death never truly wins. Everything rots, yes. But rot is just the body changing its mind about what it wants to be next. And that's comforting. Especially now, as you drift towards sleep. Because even in silence, even in stillness, the world below and beyond you is busy continuing, softly, invisibly, endlessly. The spores are out there. Waiting. Traveling. Becoming. And maybe, somewhere, one is already landing, finding new soil under a new sun, beginning again. So sleep easy tonight. You are, in some quiet way, part of that same story. One brief bloom in a vast and patient garden. Good night, traveler. And remember, nothing ever really ends. It just decomposes, beautifully. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. We've gone from ancient cave rituals to interstellar spores. But tonight, we're coming back down, back to Earth, back to the slow, beautiful business of rotting. Because no matter how hard we've tried, humans have never been very good at accepting decay. We fight it, scrub it, perfume it, hide it under marble and gold. And yet, somehow, the fungi always win. So tonight, let's drift through that long, futile struggle. The battle against rot. The strange, sometimes hysterical ways humanity tried to stop it, while quietly being made of it all along. Take a breath. Let your shoulders sink. And imagine the smell of damp soil after rain. That's the smell of victory, for the mushrooms. Let's start in Egypt, land of the preserved. The ancient Egyptians, bless them, had a small obsession with permanence. They embalmed their dead with salts, oils, and resins. They drained the body, dried it, wrapped it in linen, and sealed it in tombs built to last forever. They were determined to outwit decay. But what's funny is this. The same tombs that protected the dead from rot were slowly eaten from within by fungi. Microscopic spores growing on the linen, feasting quietly on oils meant to preserve the flesh. Even Tutankhamun's mask, once open to the air, showed faint traces of fungal bloom. A soft green reminder, you can delay us, but you can't deny us. Move forward a few thousand years. To medieval Europe. Where rot wasn't hidden, it was holy. Monks in cold stone abbeys copied texts about the afterlife surrounded by the smell of must and mildew. They didn't have disinfectant or bleach. Decay was simply part of the architecture. Fungi grew in cellars, on parchment, on bread. In some monasteries, they even saw decay as divine. Corruption of the flesh was proof that the body was returning to dust, as God intended. Only the incorruptible saints, those whose corpses refused to rot, were considered suspiciously miraculous. So yes, in medieval theology, not rotting could get you canonized. Rotting properly meant you were human. Which is, refreshingly honest. The Renaissance brought perfume, powders, and a more delicate nose. Decay became something to fear, to disguise. The wealthy coated themselves in scents to hide the smell of themselves. But of course, the more perfume they wore, the more moisture they trapped. And the more moisture they trapped, the more mold grew. Palaces that smelled of roses by day often bloomed with mildew by night. In a way, every Renaissance ballroom was two worlds at once, one fragrant and glittering above, and one damp and fungal below. The people just pretended not to notice. And then came the Victorians. Oh, the Victorians, those anxious masters of control. They industrialized death itself. They built airtight coffins, embalming fluids, funeral parlors. They waged an organized war against decomposition. But beneath the polished mahogany and heavy drapes, the same story unfolded. Bodies preserved in lead coffins began to swell and rupture from trapped gases. Fungal growths bloomed on graveyard walls. Even Queen Victoria's own mausoleum needed regular cleaning to remove creeping molds. There's something deeply poetic about that. The age most obsessed with appearances was quietly undone by the smallest, hungriest forms of life. modernity didn't do much better. Today, we sanitize everything: bleach, alcohol, antimicrobials. We wrap our food in plastic and pump it full of preservatives. We embalm our dead with formaldehyde. We build houses to seal out moisture. And still, rot finds a way in. Food spoils, wallpaper molds, cities crumble, and within each human body, decay begins before death. Every breath we take carries fungal spores. Every cell is already rehearsing the choreography of disassembly. Life, for all its denial, is just the slow postponement of decomposition. But it wasn't always a war. Some cultures saw decay not as defeat, but as transformation. In Japan, Shinto tradition accepts rot as sacred renewal. Fallen leaves, rusted metal, moss on old stone, all signs of harmony between time and matter. The Japanese word wabi-sabi roughly translates to the beauty of impermanence, a kind of aesthetic surrender. Meanwhile, indigenous communities across the Americas used decomposing wood as part of spiritual practices, seeing the cycle of death and rebirth as the forest breathing. To them, fungi weren't filth. They were proof that the world was still alive. And maybe that's what the modern world lost. We forgot that decay is the second half of creation. We turned it into an enemy instead of an ally. Even our architecture shows it. We build towers of glass and steel to resist time, while underneath, the concrete slowly grows green. Cracks fill with lichen, and the first spores move in. Cities rot in slow motion. And if you stand quietly in an empty building long enough, you can almost hear it breathing. But here's the thing. We need decay. Without it, life would drown in its own remains. Nothing would return to the soil. The dead would pile up like paper, unprocessed, unrenewed. Fungi, bacteria, and rot, they are the recyclers of existence. They make endings useful. They ensure that what falls becomes what grows. And the irony, of course, is that the same people who fear decay the most depend on it completely. Your bread rises because of yeast. Your wine ferments through microbial teamwork. Your antibiotics? Discovered in mold. The fungus you scrub from your shower could also save your life in pill form. It's all one story, just told in different rooms. And so, perhaps, there's something to learn from the cult of decay. From the people who tried to fight it, and lost. Because no matter how clean we make our walls or how sterile our cities seem, we're still part of the same slow process. We're not separate from rot. We are rot, just briefly arranged into something with opinions. Every laugh, every word, every heartbeat, temporary structures in a grand compost heap of being. And isn't that kind of freeing? You don't have to last forever. You just have to feed the story. So, the next time you see a mushroom growing through concrete, don't scowl. It's not an invasion. It's an inheritance. It's the earth reminding you that nothing is wasted. Not even you. And somewhere, beneath all the noise, the same quiet empire continues its work. Digesting, recycling, remembering. Not cruelly. Just efficiently. Still awake? Then you've survived the first half of the decay cycle. Now it's time to see what happens when humans embrace it, when we stop fighting entropy and start designing with it. In Part 7, Compost Kingdoms, How Rot Became the Future of Civilization, we'll explore how modern science, architecture, and philosophy are rediscovering the elegance of decomposition. We'll visit mushroom-made cities, self-digesting coffins, and gardens that eat plastic. Until then, just breathe. Decay is happening all around you, softly, invisibly, lovingly. The world is always rearranging itself. And in that endless rearrangement, you'll find something close to peace. Good night, my little carbon-based miracle. Don't worry about the rot. It's only the world saying, thank you. ChatGPT said. Part 7, Compost Kingdoms, How Rot Became the Future of Civilization. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. Let's keep sinking a little deeper, into the soil, into the soft heartbeat of what comes next. We've drifted through the history of mushrooms, the quiet defiance of fungi, the failure of humans to outwit decay. But tonight, we'll turn that failure into philosophy. Because somewhere along the line, people started realizing that rot isn't just inevitable. It's ingenious. And, oddly enough, it might be the one thing that could save us. So take a deep breath. Let your mind slow. And picture this. A city built not on concrete, but on compost. Warm, living, breathing. Changing shape as it pleases. Welcome to the future, one that's finally learned to decompose itself. Once upon a time, compost just meant a pile of kitchen scraps in someone's backyard. Rotting vegetables. Coffee grounds. Eggshells if you were feeling fancy. It wasn't glamorous. Now it's philosophy. Designers, scientists, even architects are all obsessed with decay. They call it circularity. Cradle-to-cradle design. Or, if they're feeling poetic, the living cycle. It means creating things that don't end, they transform. Clothes that return to soil. Furniture that grows. Houses that quietly feed the earth instead of scarring it. In other words, compost is civilization. One of the leading figures in this quiet revolution was a Dutch designer named Maurizio Montalti. He looked at fungi and saw not rot, but structure. Not decay, but design. He grew chairs, lamps, and even coffins entirely from mycelium. No screws. No plastic. Just growth. When the object's life was over, it didn't become waste. It simply rejoined the cycle. A kind of gentle return. There's something deeply peaceful in that. Imagine sitting on a chair that one day decides to return itself to the soil. No landfill. No guilt. Just a soft sigh and a fade into the ground. And it's not just art anymore. Around the world, entire industries are turning to fungi for answers. We've built civilization on materials that don't die, plastic, concrete, metal, and now they're drowning us. Fungi, on the other hand, specialize in dying beautifully. Take Mycoworks, a company that grows leather from mycelium. They call it Rasure. It looks and feels like animal hide, but no animals die, and when you're done with it, it composts. Fashion that decomposes gracefully, without drama. Something Paris Couture never quite mastered. Even NASA has begun exploring mycelium habitats, homes that can be grown on Mars, and then digested when no longer needed. A perfect life cycle. No waste, no residue, no ghosts of use. It's almost romantic. Imagine leaving a house not to rot, but to bloom. Of course, compost isn't just about materials. It's a mindset. It asks you to stop seeing endings as failures. To stop thinking of death as destruction. To understand that all creation includes disassembly. Modern culture worships permanence, monuments, archives, legacies. But permanence is exhausting. It demands maintenance. It refuses to breathe. Compost doesn't resist time. It dances with it. It says, go ahead. Break me down. I'll be something else tomorrow. There's freedom in that. You can even see compost logic sneaking into technology. Biodegradable circuits. Data storage that decays after use. Computers built on organic materials. It's as if we finally realized. The only sustainable machine is one that knows when to die. Meanwhile, our human bodies, always the most elegant of recyclers, are leading the way. take recomposition, the modern alternative to burial or cremation. Instead of embalming or burning, your body is placed in a vessel with straw, wood chips, and fungi. Within a few weeks, nature does what it's always done. You decompose. Cleanly, efficiently, lovingly. And when it's over, your family receives rich, fertile soil. It's called natural organic reduction. It's legal now in several countries. And yes, you can even pre-order it, like a subscription box for existential acceptance. It's not morbid. It's honest. You return what you borrowed. Even cemeteries are evolving. In the Netherlands, a company called Loop grows mycelium coffins that completely dissolve in weeks. They call it living burial. The coffin itself continues to feed the ecosystem long after the body is gone. So the grave stops being a place of stillness. It becomes a garden. Imagine walking through a cemetery where mushrooms bloom softly from the soil, where each grave hums quietly with new life, where death finally remembers how to be generous. And it's not just the dead. Cities, too, are learning to compost themselves. Architects in Singapore and Copenhagen are designing buildings meant to decay intentionally, with facades that weather into silver gray, concrete that slowly crumbles into moss-filled cracks, walls that host entire gardens of lichen and fungi. The idea isn't to preserve, but to participate. To make cities behave more like forests, dynamic, self-renewing, and slightly damp. In this vision, maintenance becomes an act of gardening rather than domination. You don't fight the rot. You prune it. It's funny how modern progress has led us right back to the oldest wisdom of all. Everything feeds on something else. And when you stop pretending otherwise, life gets simpler. Indigenous philosophies knew this all along. Compost isn't a new idea, it's a rediscovery. It's humanity remembering that we are guests, not landlords. That soil isn't a resource, it's a relative. The compost future is less about innovation and more about humility. A quiet bow toward the ground. And if you think about it long enough, there's a strange comfort in realizing that decay is democracy. It doesn't matter if you're a king, a billionaire, or a broken toaster. Everything decomposes equally. Every body, every monument, every forgotten gadget. Rot doesn't care for rank. It just keeps the cycle turning. Which makes it, in a way, the most merciful force in the universe. But here's where it gets oddly poetic. In embracing decay, humans are accidentally learning empathy. When we compost, we admit that our leftovers have value. When we design to decompose, we accept that our creations have limits. And when we let go of permanence, we start treating time like a collaborator instead of a thief. Fungi have known this since forever. They've been building and rebuilding reality one cell at a time, never clinging, never grieving, just continuing. Maybe that's why people find compost calming. It's the closest thing to forgiveness nature offers. So next time you toss a banana peel into the compost bin, imagine it joining a slow, silent community. Molecules rearranging, atoms reuniting, energy shifting shape. That peel doesn't disappear, it migrates. Into worms, into soil, into roots, into air. And eventually, back into you. The circle isn't symbolic. It's literal. You have probably breathed ancient dust once part of a pharaoh. Touched a table once made of your ancestors. Eaten a molecule once whispered through a forest's fungal web. Compost isn't a metaphor for life. It is life. Still awake? Then let's keep floating just a little further. Past compost piles and fungal cities. Into something stranger still. Because if the future belongs to decay, then maybe memory is just another form of rot. In Part 8, The Rot of Memory, How Time Decomposes History, we'll drift through the soft erosion of knowledge, How civilizations fade like fallen logs. How archives mold. And how forgetting is nature's favorite kind of mercy. Until then, breathe softly. You are compost in motion. And somewhere beneath the ground, the world is already preparing your return. Not as punishment, but as poetry. Good night, little fragment of the future. You're doing beautifully. ChatGPT said. Part 8, The Rot of Memory, How Time Decomposes History. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. You've made it this far through the damp corridors of human decay. So you might as well follow me a little further. Into the slow unraveling of memory itself. Because just like everything else, memory rots. Not always literally, but definitely faithfully. Time doesn't just erode stone, it erases meaning. And humans, being the sentimental creatures they are, keep pretending they can preserve it. So tonight, we'll drift gently through the decomposition of history. How civilizations fade, how archives turn to dust, and how forgetting, despite our best efforts, might be the most natural thing we ever do. Let's start with the comforting lie that history remembers everything important. It doesn't. History is the compost heap of human memory. A few bits of empire and gossip survive because someone happened to write them down. Most of it, the laughter, the kindness, the small humiliations, all dissolve quietly, without ceremony. You can almost hear it. The soft crumble of parchment. The sigh of language losing its edge. Latin, Greek, Akkadian, once alive, now fossilized mid-sentence. We think we're chronicling civilization. Really, we're just composting words. The Egyptians tried to cheat that truth. They carved their names in stone, filled tombs with portraits, and embalmed bodies with the precision of tax accountants. They wanted eternity. And they almost got it. Except eternity smells like dust and tourists now. Their gods, once cosmic powers, are now cartoon mascots for museum gift shops. Ra, Osiris, Isis, all reduced to refrigerator magnets. That's what eternity does. It simplifies. The irony is almost beautiful. The culture most obsessed with immortality became the one most perfectly preserved in ruin. Let's drift over to another empire, Rome. A city obsessed with conquest, order, and marble. They built roads that outlived their language, statues that survived their morals, and bureaucracy so complex even their ghosts would need permits. Yet, in the end, Rome didn't collapse in fire and battle like everyone likes to imagine. It decayed. Slowly. Elegantly. Bureaucratically. The paperwork simply outlasted the people. When barbarians sacked the city, most citizens were too bored to care. The real rot had already happened, from within. That's how memory fades. Not with war, but with apathy. Even libraries, our temples of preservation, are temporary. The Library of Alexandria didn't vanish in a single dramatic fire. It died like all things do, piecemeal. Scroll by scroll. Budget cut by budget cut. Ignored. Reused. Repurposed. Some say monks in later centuries recycled ancient scrolls to write prayers on top of them, erasing Aristotle to make room for Psalms. The divine overwritten by devotion. It's oddly poetic. And somewhere in that act, scraping old ink to make space for new faith, you can see humanity's favorite ritual. We destroy what we remember, so we can remember what we destroy. Even the most powerful kings couldn't escape the composting of reputation. Take King Charles II of Spain. A monarch so inbred he was described as barely functional. He couldn't chew properly, couldn't speak clearly. and his autopsy revealed a single shriveled testicle black as coal. He was called El Hechizado, the Bewitched King. People whispered that he was cursed. In a way, he was. By his own ancestors. And yet, after centuries, his name has softened. History forgets the smell and keeps the symbol. He's no longer a man, he's a cautionary tale. Rot polished into myth. But sometimes, forgetting is a mercy. Think of the plague pits beneath London. Tens of thousands buried hurriedly, nameless, decomposing into urban soil. Their stories are gone. And yet their remains feed the gardens above. Even memory, it seems, nourishes something when it's gone. Modern archaeologists dig them up. And instead of names, they find data. Teeth, bones, isotopes. Humanity, repackaged as research. We may have lost their memories, but we kept their minerals. It's not a bad trade. Time doesn't delete, it recycles. Just like compost, memory breaks down into nutrients for new myths. Take medieval saints. Half of them were likely invented or exaggerated. A peasant gets struck by lightning. Someone builds a shrine. And within a few generations he's the patron saint of weather. Faith eats fact. And memory ferments into legend. We call it tradition. But really, it's just history's aftertaste. Even in our age of digital preservation, we're just building bigger compost heaps. Every photo, every message, every frantic attempt to save ourselves online. It all degrades. Not physically, but contextually. 1,000 years from now, if anyone finds your tweets, they'll read like cave paintings from a confused species obsessed with lunch. Our data won't be lost. It'll just be unintelligible. The ultimate form of decay. We're already living in the mold bloom of our own information. But let's not mourn it too much. Memory isn't meant to be eternal. If it were, the world would choke on its own past. Forgetting clears the air. It lets us move. Without decay, nothing new would ever grow. And maybe that's why civilizations fade. Not because they fail, but because they make room. The Sumerians, the Mayans, the Byzantines. Each one composted into the next. Their ruins became quarries. Their scripts became curiosities. Their gods became metaphors. We walk on their remains every day, both literally and linguistically. Our words are the mulch of forgotten empires. So what does it mean to remember responsibly? Maybe it means accepting that all memory is partial. That every story we tell, this one included, is already decomposing as we speak. And maybe that's not tragic. Maybe it's beautiful. Because the moment something starts to fade, it stops trying to be perfect. It just becomes what it is. And in that stillness, there's peace. So, the next time you visit a museum, look past the glass and the labels. What you're seeing isn't preservation. It's slow-motion decay. Stone powdered into meaning. Fabric whispering its way into dust. History is not a record, it's residue. And that's okay. Residue is enough. Still awake? Good. Because in the next part, we're going to wander somewhere a little stranger. If memory decomposes, what about belief? What happens when faith itself begins to rot? When gods, like empires, turn to soil? In part 9, when the gods went feral, the decay of divinity, we'll drift through the forgotten temples, the dethroned deities, and the long, slow composting of the divine. Until then, rest your mind. Let your own memories soften at the edges. You don't have to hold them all. They'll return in their own time. In other forms. Other lives. Other soil. Good night, little historian. The past is still whispering. Just quieter now. ChatGPT said. Part 9, When the Gods Went Feral, The Decay of Divinity. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. We've wandered through the rot of memory, through the soft unraveling of civilization itself. Now, let's drift a little deeper, into the ruins of belief. Because gods, like everything else, eventually decay. Not in body, of course, but in presence. They fade. Their temples crumble. Their hymns lose their rhythm. And what remains isn't a divine being, but a kind of echo. A spiritual compost heap, myths feeding myths. So tonight, let's visit the pantheons that didn't make it. The abandoned heavens. The deities that once ruled everything, and now survive only as names, carved faintly into stone. Once upon a time, well, all the times, really, humans built gods out of weather. When the sky flashed, it was Zeus. When the crops failed, it was Demeter's grief. When rivers rose and drowned villages, it was the gods being dramatic again. They weren't cruel, just moody. Divinity, after all, was a way to organize chaos. It made existence make sense. But gods, like governments, are fragile things. They depend on attention. They need worship the way mushrooms need moisture. Without it, they dry up. The Romans even had a word for it, oblivio. The forgetting of a god. It was considered dangerous. A divine neglect. They feared that if a god was forgotten long enough, it would go feral. Imagine that, a pantheon gone rogue. No longer fed by incense and prayer. Just drifting, untethered, through the ruins. The idea wasn't so strange to the ancient world. Abandoned gods were thought to wander the earth like stray dogs. Still divine, but unpredictable. Half powerful, half lost. You could stumble into an old shrine, whisper the wrong name, and accidentally reawaken something that hadn't been worshipped in centuries. So the Romans built rituals for forgetting. They didn't just stop worshipping, they released their gods. Gave them permission to go. A quiet, bureaucratic apocalypse. But most gods don't get such closure. They simply fade. Take Enlil, once the storm god of ancient Mesopotamia. Thousands of temples. Millions of prayers. For nearly 2,000 years, he was the supreme power of heaven and earth. And then, silence. Now he exists as a handful of broken tablets and a footnote in archaeology textbooks. The world didn't reject him. It just stopped remembering he was there. That's how divinity dies, not with blasphemy, but with boredom. The same story repeats everywhere. The Egyptian pantheon, once busier than a modern parliament, fell to one ambitious pharaoh's ego trip, Akhenaten, who tried to replace all the gods with a single solar disk named Aten. He built an entire city for him, Akhetaten, a radiant utopia of sunlight and devotion. Then he died. And within a generation, Aten was erased. The priests smashed his temples, scrubbed his name from walls, and went back to business as usual. The sun god fell victim to human inconsistency. He rose and set, like all the others. Even the mighty Norse gods, Thor, Odin, Freya, didn't vanish because of war or reason. They simply lost relevance. Christianity arrived with paperwork and literacy. And slowly, the old myths decomposed into folklore. Odin became a wandering beggar in local legends. Freya turned into a fairy queen. Thor was downgraded to a children's story. And the sagas that once shaped entire cultures became bedtime tales, told softly, before sleep, like this one. The gods didn't die. They just adapted to being forgotten. That's the strange thing about belief. It's not binary. It's compost. When one faith falls, its pieces feed another. Zeus becomes Jupiter, who becomes a saint. Ishtar becomes Aphrodite, who becomes the Virgin Mary with better branding. The divine doesn't disappear, it mutates. Old gods survive as metaphors, then symbols, then aesthetics. We still build temples, just digital now. We still worship, only we call it engagement. And our gods? They have logos. Even modern faiths are learning this slow truth. Belief is biodegradable. It softens with time. It loses certainty, gains metaphor, and eventually becomes culture. The Bible becomes literature. The Quran becomes history. The Vedas become philosophy. Each one still sacred, but quieter. Resting in the soil of memory, not ruling from it. And maybe that's how it should be. Because even gods need to rest. Let's drift, for a moment, to the island of Delos in the Aegean Sea. Once, it was sacred to Apollo, the bright god of light and prophecy. No one could be born or die there, it was too holy. Temples glittered in the sun. Pilgrims came from across the world. Now, it's silent. Just marble and wind. The sea whispering through the ruins. If you stand there at dusk, you can almost feel the divine residue. Warm, like the ghost of sunlight. Apollo isn't gone. He's just retired. In the Andes, old Incan gods like Inti and Pachamama were woven into Catholicism after the conquest. Their temples became churches. Their festivals, saint days. And their names whispered quietly beneath the Latin hymns. You can still feel them there. Under the frescoes in gold. A soft pulse of older faith beneath the imported one. That's how gods survive now. Camouflaged. Disguised as heritage, or poetry, or nostalgia. Even our disbelief is a form of worship. We still talk about them, after all. If you've ever walked into an abandoned church, you know what divine decay feels like. The air heavy with dust and time. The faint smell of wax. The sunlight slanting through broken glass. It doesn't feel empty. It feels patient. As if something once sacred is still waiting. Not to return. Just to finish fading. That's how belief decomposes. Quietly. Gracefully. Into atmosphere. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the gods wanted all along. To be remembered not as rulers, but as stories. As compost for imagination. They were always reflections of us. Our fears, our hungers, our awe. And when we stopped needing thunder to explain thunder, they let us move on. The divine didn't die. It matured. Still awake? Then let's take one more slow breath. Because if gods can decay, if memory can fade, and if even life itself composts, then maybe the real miracle isn't survival. Maybe it's surrender. And in part 10, the stillness of extinction, when the world forgets us entirely, we'll drift into that last, inevitable quiet. The point where not even memory remains. And the only thing left is the earth, softly continuing without us. Until then, rest easy. Let your thoughts wander into the old temples. The gods are still there, somewhere in the dust. Not watching. Not judging. Just waiting to be part of the soil again. Good night, traveler of forgotten heavens. You're among kind company now. ChatGPT said. Part 10, the stillness of extinction, when the world forgets us entirely. Hey everyone, still here, still awake? If you are, that's fine. You've followed the trail this far, from spores and compost, through kings and memories, even into the fading breath of forgotten gods. So let's take one last wander. One final descent. Tonight, we're drifting into the quietest place of all. The one beyond decay, beyond remembering, beyond meaning. The stillness that waits after everything, when even the compost has no one left to feed. Welcome to extinction. Not the tragedy of it, not the fear of it. Just the calm, inevitable silence of it. Extinction has always been the background hum of life. Species come and go, civilizations rise and dissolve. And the earth just keeps turning, indifferent, content, and profoundly patient. We like to think of it as something dramatic, something worth headlines. But extinction is rarely violent. It's usually slow, like a candle running out of air. A quiet thinning. A sigh that never quite ends. If you listen closely enough, you can almost hear it happening. Not in a scream, but in a kind of hush. Let's drift back a little, to the great extinctions of the past. The Ordovician, the Permian, the Cretaceous. Names that sound like half-remembered kingdoms. Each one erased almost everything. Then quietly started again. Even the most famous, the one with the dinosaurs, wasn't a single cataclysmic moment. It was a long, complicated dying. Ash in the sky, darkness in the seas, decades of slow starvation. No one ever really saw the dinosaurs vanish. They just stopped appearing. That's extinction's real trick. It hides in the ordinary. One less footprint. One fewer song. Humans have always taken extinction personally. When we lose a species, we feel it as guilt. And rightly so, we've hurried more than a few along. But in truth, we're only participating in an ancient process. The planet has been erasing itself for billions of years. We're just the first species self-aware enough to notice. And of course, to narrate it. We turn extinction into story. We name the vanished creatures. We build museums filled with their bones. As if to prove that forgetting isn't complete yet. But the irony is, every museum is just a delay. A slow-motion burial. Time will compost the fossils too. There's something oddly peaceful about that, though. If you zoom out far enough, extinction doesn't look like an ending. It looks like breathing. Inhale, evolution. Exhale, extinction. Over and over. Even now, the planet's lungs are moving. Species disappear, others emerge. Whole ecosystems rearrange themselves while we argue about weather forecasts. And when we're gone, and we will be gone, the pattern will continue. The Earth won't grieve. It doesn't remember. It just resumes. You can already see small rehearsals of our own extinction. Empty cities quietly reclaimed by moss. Roads splitting under tree roots. Glass turning opaque under rain. Chernobyl. Pripyat. Places where humans left suddenly. And nature didn't wait for permission. Foxes on balconies. Mushrooms in bedrooms. Deer grazing in supermarkets. It's not post-apocalyptic. It's pastoral. We imagine apocalypse as fire and fury. But in truth, extinction is soft. It happens in the sound of wind through open windows. Even language will fade. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. Our words will outlast our mouths for a while. Etched on plastic, archived in servers. Buried in forgotten satellites orbiting a planet that's stopped listening. Eventually, even those will crumble. The data, the code, the myths. And what's left will be nothing at all. Or perhaps everything, rearranged. The atoms that built our stories will scatter back into circulation. Maybe one day, they'll build something new. Not human, not divine. Just alive. The ultimate compost. And yet, for all its stillness, extinction is never empty. It's full of potential. After the Permian extinction, life reinvented itself. After the dinosaurs, mammals emerged. After us, well, who knows? Maybe the next great civilization will be fungal. Cities of mycelium. Networks of living architecture humming under the soil. Communication made not with words, but with roots. No archives, no memory, no ego. Just continuation. The kind of wisdom that doesn't need to be remembered. Because it never stops being lived. Sometimes, I think that's the future humanity was meant to imitate. Not endless growth, but graceful decay. To fade elegantly. To leave good soil behind. We don't need monuments. We need mulch. And if our extinction comes quietly, in sleep, in slow generations, in the fading of cities and language, then maybe it won't even feel like loss. Just transition. Let's imagine that moment. Long after our last lights go dark. After the oceans calm and the forests return. The planet isn't mourning. It's busy. Roots crawl through concrete. Insects rediscover their empires. Rivers forget their dams. Somewhere, deep underground, a spore begins to stir. It doesn't know who we were. It doesn't need to. The cycle has already started again. That's the secret, really. Extinction isn't the opposite of life. It's the pause between breaths. And maybe, if there's any comfort to be found, it's this. We never really vanish. We just get rearranged. All the carbon in your bones, the oxygen in your lungs, the iron in your blood. It's all ancient. Older than language. Older than love. Older even than death. And when you're gone, you'll simply continue somewhere else. In air, in stone, in rain. And maybe, one day, in another mind wondering where it all went. So if the world forgets us entirely, that's fine. It was never ours to keep. We are not the story. We are the soil. And the soil remembers everything in its own way. Still awake? Good. Because you've reached the end of the circle. We began with mushrooms, those quiet engineers of rebirth. And now, we end where they always do. Under the earth. In the gentle silence that feeds all things. There's nothing left to fix, or fight, or fear. Only to rest. And to let time finish what it started. So close your eyes. Let the world keep turning without you for a while. It knows what to do. Good night, traveler. You've decomposed beautifully.